It's Projections Week here on the Beat the Shift podcast. And first up is the creator of the OOPSY Projections, Jordan Rosenblum. We'll talk about what goes into creating projections and what sets out his new model, which debuted on Fangraphs late last month. All coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and Ruben Guy is not here today. We're doing this at a little bit of an odd time because our guest is from across the pond. Want to introduce him, Jordan Rosenblum from Fangraphs, Scout the Stat Line, Prospects Live, and the creator of the OOPSY Projections. What's going on, Jordan?
Hey Ariel, how's it going? I'm from New Jersey, but yeah, nowadays based in Finland. But yeah, not that far from you, probably.
We're in Jersey. We're in Jersey.
Livingston.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Are you a Met fan?
Yes. So that can explain some of my self-deprecating projections, tone, attitude. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk today about the OOPSY Projections. That is what Jordan Rosenblum has created. They're now up on Fangraphs for the first time this year. We're really excited to talk about OOPSY. We're going to talk about projections in general. We're also going to talk about the ATC volatility metrics, the new ones for this year. I haven't provided a formal explanation on air, so we'll do that today. But, before we talk about all that, Jordan, what's your background other than being born and raised in Livingston, New Jersey?
Yeah, so I started at the Dynasty Guru, as a lot of people get their start there in 2019, and I was really interested in prospects because there's a huge divide if you're valuing prospects based on popular lists versus if you're valuing them based on projections, particularly for Dynasty leagues. If you listen to projections on prospects, you generally will feel like you have to trade every single one of them, and it's not bad to trade them sometimes, but you'll feel like they're overvalued by the market. So I wanted to make these peak projections that sort of better capture the long-term value of prospects, like in terms of how they're actually valued by the market. So that's how I first got into projections, and I did peak projections for a few years at the Dynasty Guru and Scout the Stat Line, and then at Prospects Live. But my redraft projections weren't. They were always more rudimentary. So my peak projections were park neutral and context neutral. But then I did an article at Rotoballer about incorporating stuff into the projections because I see the articles on Stuff Plus and how good it is relative to normal projections or relative to Sierra or XFIP or something. And I'm like, all right, it seems pretty good, but I don't want to throw out everything we know already. So how could I make use of this new information without throwing out the old information? And Enos Harris saw that, and then he asked me to take the lead on doing that in a more systematic way for redraft pitching projections. So then I've done those for the last 2 years. But then my hitting redraft projections weren't really ever, I never put that much time into those. But last year I did publish some sort of quietly for an article on how to incorporate spring training performance. So then I could at least test those. They weren't back tested. They were front tested, I guess. I could at least test how those WRC redraft projections did. And then this year, I've got all the usual stuff in redraft projections. So I actually felt good enough about them to put them on Fangraphs, the redraft projections.
Well, as you can tell, Jordan is a pretty smart guy. He knows all these mathematical stuff. So we might talk a little bit about them, but before we talk about the OOPSY specifically, what are the key components that go into making a projection system in general?
I think for me, I tried to build off what's already known. So Marshall's a really popular starting point, and that's Tom Tango's baseball projection system, and it's meant as a sort of basic system that people should aim to, it's sort of a naive projection that people should aim to do better than. But what it captures is basically the last 3 years of performance using a standard regression amount for all stats, like 1,200 plate appearances, and weighting the most recent performance a little bit more heavily. And then for rookies, it just assumes everybody is league average. So it assumes Christian Campbell is league average, but it also assumes you and I are also going to be major league
I'm
average.
not league average, buddy. I'm better.
Yeah, I've seen your softball. I've seen your softball stat line, but Marcel would underrate you, but it would overrate me because there's no way I'm league average. But yeah, so then starting from there, but then building onto that. So actually projecting rookies using major league equivalencies and aging curves and Marshall does have aging curves, but it doesn't use MLEs. And the MLEs can allow you to make use of all the minor league data we have on guys. And generally, most of all the projection systems use some version of MLEs, and then using regression amounts that are like specific to each component. So like strikeout rate, you don't have to regress that much. Barrel rate, you don't have to regress that much for hitters, but like BAPIP, you have to regress a lot because there's a lot of noise in that stat, a lot of random variance. So using actual custom regression amounts, and then also custom historical weights like stolen bases. Stolen base attempts, I think those you can weight. I found you can weight them recency more heavily because guys can sort of decide whether or not they're going to be more aggressive on the base pass or not, and you don't have to give the distant pass as much weight for that. You can be more focused on like the present with your stolen base projections, particularly in terms of attempts. But then for other stats, like fly ball percentage, ground ball percentage for pitchers, you might give more weight to the pass than you would for like stolen base attempts or something. So actually making regression amounts and recency weights that are based on like the data rather than just having a blanket heuristic like Marshall.
Yeah, I mean the general tenet of a baseball projection system is weighting of past years, regression to the mean, because if somebody was overperforming one year, it's probably gonna go closer to what his true talent is, and the opposite, if he underperformed, he'll go up. And aging curves, right? Because if you're 30 years old last year and you're 31 years old the next year, you're going to look different in general. Some people, of course, age differently than others, but there's some kind of average aging. And then adjusting to context, right? You might have performed really well in in Cincinnati, but then when you go to Seattle, it's going to look a little bit different in that ballpark. So adjustments like that.
Yeah, good summary. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's the general tenet. What is the general OOPSY methodology? Oh, by the way, before we that, what in the world does OOPSY stand for? Why don't you tell everybody what that is?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to make it a little silly because people can take projections very seriously, and I wanted to force people to say like OOPSY is really high on this guy, OOPSY doesn't like this guy. I thought that would be kind of funny.
We shouldn't take projections seriously, by the way.
I think we can question the assumptions. You can always take them with an air of skepticism, and yeah, you don't have to take them too seriously. You should take them the appropriate amount of serious. But yeah, and then when I was playing, I played up till high school, and I made a lot of I made a lot of mistakes. I kind of had the yips as like an infielder, so throwing from second was hard for me because I kind of would overthink it and made a lot of errors that way. So it's kind of a reference also to the fallibility of humankind, and also just like making errors.
I started as a shortstop, by the way, way back, and then when I got a little bit older and you had faster guys, I moved to third because I had a good arm, and then I found pitching. So yeah, that's my history. Nice to see that you completed the other side of the diamond at second.
Nice. Well, I had to move to the outfield because that way you don't have to think about throwing as much. And third was easier for me because the issue was more like throwing a short distance and then you can kind of overthink it. It became too much of a psychological thing. But yeah, and then I was talking to Dave Appleman about it, and he kind of reminded me that I have it capitalized as if it's an acronym, but it's not an acronym. It doesn't actually have any. It's a fake acronym. However, I'm willing to let it come up like live on its own, and naturally, if people come up with acronyms for it, I think that can add to the mystique of it. So I'll let people they can try to come up with
Of
acronyms for
course,
it. I'm fine.
ATC is an acronym. It stands for the Average Total Cost Model. ATC happens to be my initials also, just by sheer coincidence.
Nice,
I'm into
nice.
acronyms. You know, it's funny. I work in an insurance company, and my manager, he's not there anymore, but he had like an acronym for everything. He would oh, this is the cover. This is the craps. This is
Yeah,
just very into acronyms. So funny to hear.
yeah, for sure.
So, what is the general OOPSY methodology? What are you trying to accomplish over here?
Well, mainly since I had all the pieces of the projection system, I just want to make use of all the available data to me, and all the public facing data that's out there to make like to add another projection system to the mix. And I want it to be, in a way, I want it to be similar to the other systems, and I think it is in a lot of the ways. If you look at a lot of guys, the projections are remarkably similar across the systems, or they have a low intra projection volatility. Is
Oh
that am
well,
I?
we'll talk a little bit about that. We're not calling it intra SD interesty. We're not calling that anymore. We have totally new names that I'll talk about
Oh,
in a
my
second.
bad. Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, we'll talk
I'm
about it in a
excited
minute.
I'm excited to learn the new names. But yeah, I think most of the guys you can see that it's similar, and it's reassuring to me that clearly I'm weighting recency, and I have similar regression amounts to Steamer, because you can see how similar they are. But then you can also see some guys, there are bigger differences, and I think it's pretty easy to explain why. You can argue whether or not those differences are which system is more reasonable on particular guys, but I think I've been quicker to incorporate bat speed, but I think everybody will do that. So I don't think it's, in a way, it's a differentiator right now, but I don't think it'll be a different differentiator for a long time, because I think everybody else is going to incorporate bat speed also, maybe next year. And then Stuff Plus, I incorporate that. But even that doesn't move the projections a ton. So you can usually see, you can usually see like how much it's impacting a guy, and most of the time I'm pretty close, especially if you look at like FIP, and the Fangraphs War is based on FIP. Those are really really similar across the systems. But then the Stuff Plus, it seems to have an impact on BAPIP and home runs allowed a little bit. So then and the BAPIP especially wouldn't be captured in FIP. But then you can see that some of the ERA divergences are explained based on that. And I don't know if others will implement Stuff Plus, because they have like velocity and similar stuff, and they might not like the black box nature of it, but it's still pretty close. I think it's still pretty close for most guys. Of course, every system has its outliers.
All right, so before we talk a little bit about some of the specifics that I do really want to ask you about, since you mentioned the ATC volatility metrics, here's my pitch, not a pitch, here's my summary for everybody. If you haven't seen the new metrics, or if you've used the old ones or want to know a little bit about it, just a little bit about the ATC volatility. So, you're creating OOPSY. It's a standalone projection system where, you're taking all the things which you have and you will describe in a minute. But ATC is an aggregation system where I'm taking other projection systems like OOPSY and Steamer and all that, and we're incorporating it all together. There are some projection systems that do a better job at homers, some that do a better job in stolen bases, some that do a better job in pitcher strikeouts, and so I take the best and the brightest of each. The nice thing about ATC is that because it's a wisdom of the crowds method, I can see the underlying projections, and they're not always They're not always the same for every player. Some players have a very tight range of what the outcomes are. Like every projection system says, Ryan McMahon this year is going to have 20 homers. The next one says 20 homers. The next one says 20 homers. It's a very, very tight range. And some projections, like Jacob deGrom, are all over the place. In the past, I had a volatility metric called InterSD, which was like the between projection standard deviation. InterSD sounds too geeky and cumbersome. I've changed it. It's now just called volatility, and this, in short, VOL, vol. So if you see the ATC volatility metric called vol, it's literally how volatile the projections are between each other. If you have a 6-7 volatility metric, it means projections don't agree at all. They're all over the place. If you've got a low one, 1, 2, that means projections are pretty much in order. Vol will equal the old inter SD if you're converting. Skew, all right? Skew is skew is probably the most important volatility metric I have, and here's why. When you have a wisdom of crowds approach, if you have a couple of projections clustered around some area, but there's one projection that's an outlier. Let's say it's an outlier low. What happens is the ATC average will dip a little bit lower because of that low outlier projection. But because it's wisdom, the crowds, it's important to incorporate that. But I found that if you throw away that projection, you might actually the average would go up a little bit, right? And the average has tended to be a little bit more in that direction, meaning an outlier projection up or down is probably less valuable than the rest. When you're looking at the skewness of a distribution, if in general, in mathematical statistical thing, a negatively skewed distribution has most of the weight above, but there's an outlier below. So I wanted to capture a metric that shows the shape. Oh, do we have outliers low or outliers high? So the old inter skew, which would, if it would be negative, it would mean low outlier, and positive would be high outlier. But I wanted to turn around that metric and say, all right, if you have that outlier low, it's actually more upside for a player than you think. So I flipped around the sign, and so skew, a positive skew, means, you know what? That guy is better. Forget that the negative outlook guy on the bottom. It's negatively skewed, but it's got a positive outlook. So skew is actually literally the flipped sign. If you had a negative inter skew of -2, then I'm going to have a positive skew, and it's just called skew.
So Ryan Mountcastle's the top guy by skew, 3.17 value. So one system would be. What does that mean? One system would be, or there are systems that are negative outliers on him.
That's right. I don't know if he's the top guy, but
or just right now.
Yeah. Oh, it could be. So yes, if there's a positive 3 skew, that means there's a very, very negative outlier on him.
Got it.
And my studies have shown that if you actually add a little bit of the skew to the dollar amount, so let's say you project Ryan Mountcastle to be like an $8 player, if you want to risk adjust him, you would actually add some percentage of the skew. Depends on the format, but I don't know, you would add maybe 75% of the skew. So he would actually be maybe $2. He should theoretically go for $2 more than he should. You would take 75% and you would multiply by the skew and then add it to his dollar amount. Some kind of linear regression on that, but skew is actually the most important one. It actually, on an expected basis, I found historically, it's positive skew is correlated with a better than ATC average auction value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. The last metric we had was intra SD, which was a measure of pretty much if you're playing a roto league, right? You have different categories. You have homers, stolen bases, and stuff like that. And for pitchers, there's ERA, there's saves, etc. There are some players that have a very spread out distribution. Julio Rodriguez performs in every single category. He gives you stolen bases, he gives you homers, he gives you batting average, stuff like that. But then you get a guy like Luis Arias, who just is batting average, or maybe batting average and runs, 2 categories. Or then, the old Billy Hamilton, 1 category player only. So the intra SD was served to show that a lower would be less, less variance between, so better dimension. I'm like, why don't we just call this dimension? We're talking about a dimension of a player, DIM for short. And I made it on the scale of 1 to 5. If you were a exactly perfectly balanced player, you would have a dimension of 5. If you are exactly a one-dimensional player, all you do is stolen bases, period, you would have a dimension of 1 and everything in between it. So Luis Arias is a relatively low-dimensional player. He's about 2.5. Julio Rodriguez, he's really close to perfection. He's 4.8. So dimension is really, really quickly, you can look at it, and it can give you a picture of how spread out the categories are. And then Volensky gives you an idea of the underlying projections of the shape. Are projections tight? And if they're tight, are they tight up? Is there an outlier up or is there an outlier down? And with it, it paints a picture. And it does that because it aggregates other projections, right? Now, one thing I do want to say, though, is people confuse this. When you're talking about upside downside, there's different types of risk, right? Process risk is where you're talking about sample size. Process risk is where, maybe he had a good year compared to what he usually does, right? Maybe he had a really bad year. He hit 50 homers this year, but his true talent is 40. Anthony Santander had 40 homers, but his true talent is closer to like 35, so he had a particularly good percentile year, and vice versa. That's not what these volatility metrics capture. It captures what's called parameter risk. When projections project a true talent of somebody, how do you know that they're right? Every projection has a different thing. There is uncertainty, not with how many, whether he's having a good year or a bad year compared to his true talent. There's uncertainty around the true talent. We don't know exactly who he is. And so the ATC volatility metrics capture that parameter uncertainty because it gauges the wisdom of the crowds, and it actually shows you how different the crowds are to see how certain or uncertain the parameters are. That makes sense?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I've been clicking along, looking at like the top guys by each of these three metrics, and it's pretty intuitive to follow. Like Dairon Blanco being the guy with the lowest dimension value, and he's like the clear single category player. And then J.P. Crawford with the lowest volatility. Everybody has him projected like 11 or 12 homers and like the same WRC. So it is a pretty good way to summarize these various attributes.
Yep, and I'll have a full article the next couple of days out for those people who like to read this. And in case I wasn't clear or I glamored over any detail or so, and this way you can see some of the calculations there. But let's go back to OOPSY. So you use Stuff Plus, okay? I know that's Saris's metric. Can you tell everybody what is Stuff Plus, and then how do you incorporate it in a model? Because I know it comes up with some number, but how does that translate to actual strikeouts and ERA and WHIP?
So Stuff Plus is basically a metric that captures how good a pitch is based on its physical characteristics. So, in the past, it has most simply described it as like gussied up fastball velocity. So velocity is one of the key indicators that it captures, but it captures a lot of different things about the physical characteristics of a pitch. But it's used. I don't make the metric. His team makes it, and it's generated based on like XG boost methodology, sort of machine learning technique, and it's sort of a black box. But you can see which attributes are the most weigh the most heavily in it. But yeah, then in terms of incorporating it into a traditional projection, I come up with, let's say, a traditional strikeout projection that's based on the past couple years of strikeout rate for a pitcher. And then I throw a Stuff Plus model, the Stuff Plus into the regression as well, and I see if that helps. And then I throw velocity and some other indicators in there also to see if it can help the strikeout projection. And it does help for strikeouts. It helps for BABIP. It helps for home runs allowed. It doesn't help for walks, but it doesn't hurt for walks. Location.
By the way,
plus,
for everybody, when you say it helps, what does that mean? Does that mean that if you're looking at like what has transpired, did I really by incorporating it, I get closer to what the actual numbers would have been?
Exactly. Yeah. So it reduces the forecast error. It leads to more accurate forecasts if you add it in. If you're looking at historical data, if you're using like a strikeout projection without Stuff Plus, it doesn't perform as well as a strikeout projection with Stuff Plus. That's all that means. And I find it helps for strikeouts, BABIP, and home runs, even while controlling for other variables like velocity and like innings pitched per game, or like some sort of indicator for a pitcher's role. So it helps, but it doesn't like. I would say the traditional components still weigh more heavily for most guys, but Stuff Plus does help get more precise. And I've tested now. I've had more experience compared to with my hitting projections, so I've tested my Stuff Plus performance over the last couple of years, and I could test my projections with Stuff Plus versus without. And my projections with Stuff Plus do better than my projections without Stuff Plus. So that's been reassuring to see. I've incorporated it in a way that at least doesn't make anything worse.
So one thing you say that you use is barrel percentage and bat speed in your model. Bat speed would be how fast the guy swings a bat, I'm assuming. And maybe you can explain to everybody what a barrel is and what barrel percentage is, and then how do you translate into the model?
Yeah, so barrel is basically the new home runs, in my opinion, for hitters. It just captures the combination of launch angle and exit velocity that leads to the best outcomes. And many studies in the past have found barrel as like the best indicator of quality of contact for hitters.
Yeah, so just to take a step back on barrel, because I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but when you say that you hit a barrel, Statcast is describing, when you look at Statcast, there's a launch angle involved, and then there's an exit velocity, right? When you swing, right?
Yeah.
It's you're swinging a certain hard, and it's hitting at a certain velocity, and then you have a launch speed. So what Statcast is looking at is there's a number of combinations of velocity and launch angle, right? That in the past has led to a very high percentage of what's called of hits or of homers, right? What's the stat that they use?
Yeah, I would say like WOBA.
Oh, WOBA. That's right. That's
Really
right.
good
WOBA.
WOBA.
It's
Yeah.
led to a certain WOBA. I don't remember the exact number, but a very high probability of hitting a very high WOBA with a certain combination there. So if you hit a barrel, there's a higher chance. So one way to see whether somebody's going to have a good WOBA outcome using Statcast is to take a look at the combination of barrel of launch angle and exit velocity that we know in theory has done it. And if you just alone those component metrics, that can tell you a lot about what that guy is going to hit. So barrel percentage would be what percentage of the time you're actually making a barrel and making that high range of outcomes as compared to all your swings.
Yeah. And barrel percentage I use as a percentage of batted ball events, but there's also barrel rate per plate appearance.
Right.
But they're both useful. It depends on the purposes you're using them.
And how do you incorporate that into your model? Like, how does that tell you what a homer is? Do you take the barrel percentage and you regress some percentage of that, and you say, all right, well, here's a traditional, look at historical homers, but if you now take barrels and you add, some kind of number, 2 times the barrels or whatever you figure out, then that makes more homers. Is that how you do it?
Well, so it's kind of neat how I did it. So I look at home run rate per batted ball event, and I find the regression amounts and the recency weightings for that based on historical data. I don't remember exact cutoff I used, but it could be the last 10, 15 years. And then I have home run rate projected for everybody, and then barrel rate, which is only available. I only take it for major leaguers right now, and it's available for like AAA, but it's too annoying to take it just for AAA. So I'm kind of waiting until it's available in the whole minor leagues to take it from the minors. But barrel rate, I do the same thing, find the regression amount that minimizes the forecast error, find the recency weights, and that's just in the StatCast era since 2015. Then I take regress barrel rate or projected barrel rate and projected home run rate together and predict home runs together. And you could see that both home runs and barrel rate are good indicators of future home run output. And it's good to account for them at the same time. So even when accounting for projected home runs, barrel rate is important to capture, and the same is true like the other way around. Because I guess home runs, they're not just barrels. There's other indicators that are sort of indirectly. There's other skills that go into hitting home runs, like pull fly balls or whatever, that are important. So both of those metrics are important, barrels and home runs, and they both feed into my home run projections essentially.
I mean, listening to this Jordan guy sounds really smart. I don't know for everyone listening here, he knows his stuff. Question for you: how do you calculate runs and RBIs? So is it just a historical say? Oh, in the past he's had 80 RBIs, so he'll probably get 80 RBIs again or close to it, or is it a function of projected batting lineup? Do you say okay, he's probably going to hit third, and third gets X percent of the team's RBIs, and batting sixth, you get X percent of the team's runs. So is it a historical function, or do you use like batting lineup?
Um, this is like the last thing I did. First of all, like so I had to do certain things that were a little bit tedious to get them on Fangraphs, and so that they were comparable to other systems. So runs and RBIs, and then like hit by pitch and intentional walks. These were some of the things I did a little more quick and dirty. But it's based on similar to any of the other metrics. It's based on historical testing. So the key dependent variable I was trying to explain was runs per plate appearance and RBI per plate appearance, and then I looked at which component projections predicted runs per plate appearance, which is like all the different ways to get on base, and then the different component projections that predict RBIs per plate appearance, which is like all the power metrics, so like doubles and home runs, and then I get a sort of context neutral um, run per plate appearance and RBI per plate appearance projection, and then you can adjust that based on batting order and based on overall like lineup quality. Right now they're actually context or they capture the park, but I haven't made adjustments yet for they kind of assume a neutral lineup spot like in the middle, uh, and they assume like a neutral lineup. But I think as before the offseason is concluded, I'll add in some tweaks to account for like what the likely lineup spot is for each guy, and um, and to give guys a boost or a hit if they're in a really good lineup or in a really bad lineup. Because like
Yeah,
Parker's already accounted for and League's already accounted for, but some of the guys you can see are weird, like Lindor. I think I have the same like runs plus RBIs as other systems, but I have a weird balance compared to other systems, and that could be explained by the lineup thing.
yeah. So one thing, it's a blind spot of projections in general. Although some projections try to address it more than others, is that if in the past a player has batted in a certain lineup spot, and you have an indication he's going to be different. This year they're going to bat him leadoff. That's going to change the projected runs and RBIs. So it's a blind spot in projections. If you look at projections, you have to know what you're looking at. And if you see a team context has changed, just know that it's probably not incorporated properly, or I should say fully, by projections. So always know what you're looking at when you're looking at this stuff. How do you do stolen bases, right? Because I found, and in talking with players myself, is that it's pretty much I want to run. If they're going to run, there you go. Or if you go to a club that is going to run, they're going to run more. If you go to a new manager, very often will have more stolen bases because there you go. He wants the new philosophy. Or maybe you have a team that isn't really productive, doesn't have a tendency to score runs, so they might take more chances with the guys who are high percentage base stealers, and they're going to run more on those teams. So it's almost more context. I'm going to say team slash manager situation dependent. How do you address stolen bases in your model?
Yeah, I agree with your comments on stolen bases overall. So over the years, I've weighted them a lot more. I've weighted recency a lot more in terms of stolen bases, and I basically have a separate regression amount for stolen base attempts, and then stolen base success rate. Because stolen base attempts, I agree, is more like it's more like a power of positive thinking sort of thing. Like, do I want to do this? Yes, no. Whereas stolen base success rate, that's more like a skill, and you can't just like decide whether or not you're going to be very successful or not as a base stealer. And of course, if you're really unsuccessful, you may have your attempts slashed. But so I have those two metrics, and I have regression amounts for each of those based on what minimized forecast error in the past. So I have solo base attempts with the most recent season weighted quite heavily, probably more than any other metric. Although 2 years ago and 3 years ago get a little bit of weight also. And then I have stolen base success rate. that's a little more balanced in terms of the historical weighting, um, and I think regressed a little bit more heavily. But yeah, those are it's basically like any other metric, but just weighted more with recency weighted more heavily because that kind of capturing the fact that guys can sort of decide or not decide to do it, and there's more kind of room for discretion in terms of
Right.
stolen bases.
So, I know you said that OOPSY has been back tested. So, what do you check a couple of years and you're doing some regression formula on each statistic? Is that how you back test it?
Well, backtesting focuses mostly on testing different variations of OOPSY versus itself. So testing OOPSY with home runs without, or with barrels without barrels, with bat speed without bat speed. And I want to make sure that I'm putting the best version of the projections out. But I also want to make sure that it's like theoretically, each step is theoretically justified, like based and grounded in past research. Like barrels is a really well established uh, indicator of offensive power, like by now. So I don't want to just do anything to increase the accuracy if it's not theoretically justified. Um, and then I have a couple years where I'm not backtesting. I actually published 2023 and 2024 the stuff plus projections, and in 2024 the hitter redraft projections like for WRC. So I can forward test them or whatever the opposite of backtesting is, uh, and make sure that they're doing okay relative to other systems. And the redraft hitter projections were fine compared to Steamer. I think they were a little better overall. Although I'll move to testing WOBA instead of WRC in the future. And then the Stuff Plus projections too. They've been very competitive with other systems. Um, Particularly last year, the ERA projections did well, but there was Steamer still really good for pitching rate stats, and they were ahead of me in certain categories. So there's always work to be done.
So, what do you think the best way to test projections accuracy is? Because what happens is, you see them on an individual component basis, but, if somebody wants to say, I want to use projections for fantasy, um, uh, you know, uh, they're going to want to know, are you the best? Are you most accurate? What do you think is the best test for it? Because,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think. Well, I think for the projectors on Fangraphs, like me and Derek and Steamer guys and Zips, um, like the individual projection systems, we're really more concerned with the rate stats, and then we all outsource playing time to various.
Oh, that's
Uh,
another. Yeah, that's another story. So yeah, just since you're touching on it, yes, most of the projections on Fangraphs are rate. The rate per plate appearance or per at bat, and rate per inning, stuff like that. But they don't have playing time. Somebody else does the playing time, and then they just apply a rate. For Steamer and for yours, I believe you use the Fangraphs depth charts. Steamer changes it a little bit depending upon I think they make sure you have a certain number of third base at bats per team, or they do something with the playing time, but it's pretty much Jason Martinez over at in Fangraphs and Roster Resource who does it, and you incorporate that. Derek Hardy actually uses ATC playing time, so I feed it. I feed the playing time, and they do it. But yes, they're you focus on the rates, and you say, I don't know how to project innings. Well, we'll just assume a rate per inning, and multiply in the end, right?
yeah, exactly. So as a fantasy player, I do need to worry about the playing time, of course, and I have used like last year. I had a really good season as a player, and I use I weighted ATC a lot and Rasball and in terms of the playing time. But yeah, as projectors, I think we mostly focus on the rate stats, and particularly I'm putting the most weight on my ERA and WOBA projections. So those are the ones I'm going to put the most weight on if I do poorly in those or if I do well in those. If I do poorly in those, I got to do more stuff. I got to make some more bigger changes. If I do well in them, I can pat myself on the back. But those are the ones that I mostly focus on. But then I do look at every component to try to make sure that I'm competitive. In the past, I have been I haven't been as good at strikeout rate as Steamer and I think the bat or
Zips.
or maybe Zips. But yeah, I think it was Steamer and the Zips. I was ahead of the bat, and then I basically knew I had to add other variables in. So I added in. I was just capturing stuff plus and not velocity because I figured stuff plus captured velocity, but now I have velocity also because they actually both help. Um, and then the other thing is this total batters face per game that also helps predict strikeouts. So now I've closed the gap. And last year my strikeout projections were more competitive than they were 2 years ago because of that. But there's still other things I can add that could help even more. So testing all the components, but mostly I want to get WOBA right and an ERA right. And then, I mean, I can already tell you, like, if you do the game theory projections article that you've
Oh
done in the
yeah,
past, always read that one. I won't. I'm not going to win that because I didn't choose ATC for
playing time.
my for my playing time. So I can already say that. Well, I hope I do like decent in it, but I can already say I'm not going to be the best individual projection system there because I didn't use ATC. But I would be more curious to see like uh, how my projections did in that article, like with the same playing time as the bat, for instance. I chose depth charts mostly just because it's updated regularly, and I already had like access to it. Like it's seamless with Fangraphs. Like Appleman does it on his end. I don't have to do as much with it. It's not. I didn't choose it for any like accuracy reasons because I think ATC playing time is good.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is I have an article that I come out with every year. It's testing projection accuracy or usage, or I should say, a projection effectiveness, in a game theory way. And what I do is I say, okay, if you were using OOPSY projections, you would have bought, which players, right? Which players was OOPSY ahead of the market, right? And maybe for top players, you don't have to be that much ahead of the market because you would buy it at a high price. But if there's going to be a $5 player, you want OOPSY to show a $10, so you would buy him, right? And it shows, okay, what players would OOPSY buy? What players would ATC buy? What players would the bat buy? And then it says, okay, well, how have they done this year? Did they return a profit or not? And it looks at the average profit for each projection based on the players that they would buy. And to me, that's a great indicator of the effectiveness of the projections. ATC does well almost every single year in it because ATC the strength about ATC is that it has got a great bypass signal. Like ATC, because it's aggregating, will never give an outlier projection. Oh my God, this guy is going to hit 59 homers, which by the way we'll talk about in a minute about one of your projections. But ATC will say, okay, this guy is better than the market or not better than the market, buy or not buy or pass. And the reason why that's more important to get it directionally right rather than the magnitude is because you're getting the whole upside. If you bought Shohei Ohtani last year, you're buying him. You're getting all his upside. Whether you projected he would have 40 homers, 50 homers, or whatever, doesn't matter. As long as you bought him, you're still getting that whole realized value, right? If you buy a stock, right, as long as you say this stock is a buy, it really doesn't matter how much of a buy, a bargain you think that this stock is, you're getting all the upside, right? So the accuracy is not as much involved in getting the magnitude right. It's whether you buy or sell on the asset, if that makes sense. And that's what I test. So, in general, what do you think OOPSY does the best, and what do you think is maybe a weakness that it could improve in the future?
I mean, there's tons of things that I could add in terms of like pitch level metrics that I hope to add in the future, and then there are sort of gaps that I need to account for. I want to get like in terms of lineup slot and the overall like team quality for the runs and RBIs. That's one thing I mentioned. In terms of KBO and MPB guys, I don't have my own foreign translations yet, so I don't have to project those guys. Fangraphs actually makes up like or it just makes up its own projection for the guys I don't have. So like Sasaki has like a 5 year ERA. That's not me that's obviously not a good Sasaki projection. But
Oh, it's good to know. It's good to know, by
yeah,
the way.
yeah, for sure. Fangraphs they'll just put in like average bench player projection for those guys. But yeah, those are like the foreign league things. That's high on the to do list, and I could just take Steamer for now, but I don't want to. I've already taken them from for other stuff, and I don't want to take like I haven't like spoken with them about it. Um, so I have to decide whether for Sasaki and Kim if I should just do an average of like various projection systems, or if I should just go through the steps like everybody else and do my own, find my own MLEs, but MLEs for the KBO and MPB. But I'm sure that I would come out similar because basically all the projection systems like those guys. Um, and what does it do well? Well, I think I've been quicker to incorporate new metrics that help into the projections, and at the same time I incorporate all of the usual stuff with my own major league equivalencies and my own aging curves and my own regression amounts. And I think those are all quite updated and fresh and rigorously like developed. They've been rigorously developed. So I feel good about the methodology. I like seeing that it's similar on a lot of guys to the usual systems. And when there are differences, I like seeing that I can explain those differences. But like for bat speed, I've already looked at. You can take each projection, mid-season projection from last year, for Zips, for Steamer, for the Bat X, whatever. You could take, as of like July 12th, you look at the projected WOBA for the rest of the season. And then you have the bat speed or hard swing rate, just like another way to measure bat speed, before July 12th. And then you could look at both of those measures and regress post July 12th performance on both of those measures. And you can see that bat speed helps a lot to explain like why guys are over or under projected as of midseason last year. So that's like a fair test. It's not back testing at all. It's forward looking, and you can see that it helps each of the systems. So I'm confident that each of them will take it in some way, because it's like low hanging fruit to be added. But at the same time, that I don't want to make that the differentiator for my system, because it won't always be the differentiator. Mainly, my system is just another system that has. I've tried to make a reason. There's like hundreds of decisions that go into making a projection system, and I've tried to make it reasonable and just like decisions that are justified by the data in each step. And then I think if you take the average of projectors making these sorts of decisions, you can get a pretty good product like you do with ATC. So overall, I just want to like fit in with the other cool projections kids.
Well, you definitely do fit in. Here's not a critique or criticism, but just more of a question of, since you're using Stuff Plus and using barrel percentage and bat speed, it really is the reason why it would be good to use is if it's sticky year to year. Now, I've heard from Eno that Stuff Plus is not as sticky year to year. It's great in season. So, if you see Stuff Plus in the middle of the season and you made a rest of season projection that uses Stuff Plus, that would be a lot more effective than, and by the way, tell me if I'm wrong, than season to season. In Stuff Plus, it's somewhat sticky, but not that sticky. And that might be true for bat speed as well. Is there any am I right at all with what I'm saying?
I think the main thing for those two metrics, even if they're not as sticky year to year, I mean, we don't have bat speed data yet year to year, but they're really, really sticky metrics. So bat speed, basically, if you look at the regression amount, you basically don't need to regress it at all. It's like 2 swings, and then you have a pretty good indicator of what a guy's actual bat speed is. It's every bit the hitter equivalent of like pitcher velocity, which is also based on like is highly reliable in like 2 pitches or 1 pitch. And Stuff Plus is a little bit more noisy than that, but overall you're adding like 4. I had like 4 innings of regression. You basically don't need to regress that either. So they're both really, really sticky measures.
All right. So the assumption though is so it's a really good metric with the assumption that they're going to continue that. But like if you start the first weekend, the bat speed is way different, where that Stuff Plus looks different, then pretty much I would say, oh, no, that projection is wrong. Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, I think with both of those metrics, part of the appeal of them is that since they're so sticky and reliable in small samples, you don't need to capture like major league equivalencies or anything for them. You can.
I would say that you're using the word sticky. To me, sticky means you can see the same thing year to year. I think more of it,
which is true.
It's a big indicator.
you can see the same thing year to year for them.
Okay. Okay.
They're really, really sticky.
Okay.
Well, for bat speed, it's from half season to half season because we don't really have a ton of year to year data. Although there is a little bit. There's a Baseball America article for like 100 players. But for Stuff Plus year to year, it's very sticky.
It is
probably more than any other stat besides pitcher velocity. But at the same time, since it also stabilizes in a really small sample, projectors have to make a judgment call in like early on in 2025. Should we just use the bat speed from 2025, or should we give 2024 some weight? And I think basically I would move very rapidly toward
Right.
giving 2025 all the
That's
weight.
the point I was making. Yeah. Right. Okay. Last question before we talk about some players that OOPSY likes or hates. Do you think OOPSY is better used in terms of just baseball as a baseball projection system, or do you see OOPSY as a very fantasy baseball oriented system? And I say this being that I think ATC is like a fantasy baseball system first before it's a baseball. It's great for both, but to me, it's more fantasy baseball driven and oriented. Would you say that's true about OOPSY?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of there's blurred lines between those two.
Yeah, sure.
So I think if you're going to use it for fantasy baseball, which I am going to use it for that, but then you have to, in terms of the playing time, like I'm not giving real guidance on what to do with that. So for my own fantasy baseball team, and I'm in the Champions League this year. I had a really good season at FBC last year.
And you used ATC last year.
Well, I used Steamer and my Stuff Plus projections.
Yeah.
For rate stats, but then for playing time I used ATC, Rasball, DC. I kind of averaged them.
Got it.
It was sort of a very agnostic approach, and that worked fine. But I think I'll do something like that again this year. Although I don't really need to average ATC since it's already averaged, but it's kind of nice to see like exactly since I don't know exactly what the weights are in ATC and which systems go into it. It's kind of nice, maybe a bit controlling on my part, but
sure.
I want to see like what goes in there exactly. But I'll be fine using ATC. That's totally fine for playing time with OOPSY. That sounds good to me. But yeah, I think it's a mix of those. And if you use it for fantasy, you have to make your own sort of mental adjustments or distinctions for playing time. Yeah, but I'm mostly going to be looking at. I'm mostly going to be judging it myself on how good are the WOBA projections and how good are the ERA projections.
Well, you'll see next year if you want to use ATC on the Fangraph site as opposed to depth charts. You can do that.
Well, I already know that. For example, that would be better from from a perspective of doing well in the game theory article, but like it's kind of doesn't really matter to me, that decision. Like I don't it's since it's not my goal anyway to like.
Gotcha.
I'm judging more based on how the rate stats do, but I'll admit now that it would do better in the game theory article if I use ATC. That's for sure.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk a little bit about some players that we found that OOPSY likes or hates, and maybe we can discuss why you're right or the market or whoever is wrong. I've actually compared OOPSY to ATC, so you versus me, buddy. And I might give some criticism or say, you know what, maybe you got a point there. I don't want to dive too much into the players, but maybe a couple of highlights. First couple of players I found that OOPSY really likes: Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Ronald Acuna, Jordan Walker. And just to preface it, that there are a lot. When I did the comparison, there's a lot of players who OOPSY liked better than ATC only because of playing time. Because the Fangraph depth charts are projecting for more playing time than ATC. Well, I threw those out because they like them better. They're going to get more playing time. I'm talking about guys who have very similar playing time to each other. Which one likes better? So maybe you could talk about some of these guys in general, but Aaron Judge, I do have to comment, and I know we've had some back and forth. You've toned it down a little bit. I think he's now down to 57 homers, but originally you had Aaron Judge projected for 59 homers this year. And just to put context, that is an average projection. Meaning, in an average year, he's going to hit 59 homers. In a good year, he could hit like 70. In a bad year, he would hit less than that. But on an average, he would hit 59. And
Yeah.
the other projection systems, including my own, all have him as a really, really high player, but we're talking like a high 40s, which, by the way, is an amazing projection as it is, right? To have a projected 47 homers, but he has 459, 12 homers better than that. I don't know, but it sounds really odd to me. Maybe you can explain why and how you think that Aaron Judge 59 average homer projection. I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, so how I did bat speed, since it's just 1 year of data, I looked at project a W or like a WOBA or W projection, um, and then I added bat speed to it to sort of and regress WRC on both those metrics at the same time to see how much bat speed helped when controlling for everything else, when accounting for everything else. So I didn't want to just regress bat speed on home runs because it could make home runs it could lead to more home runs, but also lead to more strikeouts. So by capturing it together with a single indicator of performance like WRC or WOBA, you kind of capture its overall impact rather than just its impact on one component while it could have hurt other components. And it does look like more bat speed drives more strikeouts and less singles, for instance, but more home runs and more doubles. So I can see how much bat speed improves overall projection. And then this year, then I have to allocate those gains to the overall projection. So at first, I was allocating them mostly to home runs for simplicity, and those projections were still doing the best. Were still doing better than my projections without bat speed in my back testing. But it was a bit quick and dirty. So then I allocated them now to home runs and doubles. So it's a little more moderate. But with Judge, I mean, when you make a projection system, you look at the regression amounts based on historical data. You look at the recency weights based on historical data, and then you use those. You don't. It doesn't matter how good the outliers are. If they had a really sticky, if they did a really good job in the very skill based metrics like homers and barrel rate, then they're going to project. They're going to project really well. And then afterward, you can look at the outliers and kind of notice like which guys seem like a little weird based on that. But the projections are based on the regression amounts, recency weights that have been really good in the past. So they're justified in that sense. And then if you look at Judge's projection itself, the bat has him assuming the same amount of plate appearances like DCPA. The bat has him at 55 homers, and I'm at 57. So it's actually not that much of an outlier. And you're actually, I think, even since we started this conversation, the ATC may have already moved towards me a little bit. I don't think ATC captures new projection systems, but I do think that it's not that big of an outlier. It's like a few extra home runs, and those can be explained
59 homers is, I mean, we're talking about the AL record is 62, and that's Aaron Judge in his, oh my God, year. Like,
okay, would you make the same criticism of the bat though? Because it's at 55, assuming the same amount of plate appearances. I'm at 57.
I would say that seems pretty high also.
Okay, fine. No, that's fine. The
yeah.
Judge he's been insanely good, and it's still expecting some regression. He had a 218 WRC plus last year, and I'm at 198. But my internal WRC is more like 191, which I'm more comfortable with. Because the Fangraphs WRCs are based on their park factors impacted and their sort of like WOBA coefficients. But without bat speed and barrel rate, I have Judge at maybe like 4 or 5 less homers and like a 180 WRC plus, which is much more in line with the other systems. Is actually below the bat X. So you can at least see like what's driving those gains. It's bat speed. And it's barrel rate. Like whether or not it's wrong, we can explain it at least.
And I totally understand. Yeah. I totally understand that your math and your stuff doing it, but I don't know. When I see an overall picture and I see a 59, and by the way, I'm trying to sound like not a math guy, even though I am a math guy, but it just sounds wrong, right? No, and I mean, from a historical context, you know, to hit 59 or more homers is, you know, at an all-time high, and I get that Judge is just a beast, and he's done it for the last year, but to me that's like an upside pick, or it's in his 90th, 70th percentile, whatever it is. I don't know. I it's hard to expect that kind of excellence to continue. I mean, like Pete Alonso is a major home run dude, but he's got like a 40 homer projection.
Yeah, I mean,
59.
ultimately, Judge has over the last 2,000 plate appearances, or since the beginning of 2022, his WRC has been like 200, and
He had outlier years though.
his xWOBA is like range from 461 to 479, even ahead of his like actual performance, and that stuff's all going into the projections, and that's why he projects so well. Like many projection systems have him over 50 or like hitting the 50 mark, assuming assuming the same amount of plate appearances. I do think that there's like playing time risk there. He may not get to 57 for those reasons. That's probably the biggest risk, but like because like some sort of weird injuries or something. But I think on the rate stats, he's earned that projection by being really good at the metrics that matter for home runs these last couple of years.
Yeah, but then
He's
you don't
been
have Juan Soto in the lineup also, right? When you have Juan Soto for protection and stuff like that, and he's on, then you might pitch differently to Judge. Like that, it assumes that he's going to have such a great lineup. I don't know if he's going to have the same kind of strength of lineup, right? There's other factors.
I mean, if I'm wrong on Judge because they intentional walk him all the time and he has like a 250 Bonzian type of WRC, that's fine. I mean, basically the projections are saying
he's good.
He's incredible, good. And if teams adjust to that by they're too scared to pitch them, it's actually all the more endorsement of this crazy.
According to the auction calculator on Fangraphs NBC style settings, Aaron Judge is a projected $40 player. According to ATC, according to OOPSY, he's a $49 player. If you are using solely OOPSY projections, you're going to be buying Aaron Judge every single time. So, hey, I'll let the listeners decide whether we buy that projection. I personally don't. Sorry, but it makes me happier though to hear how you think about it. And I guess Derek Hardy is on the high side. I haven't looked into too much of his individual stuff. But some of the other guys, anything to say about Stanton, Acuna, or Jordan Walker that is interesting?
Yeah, so if I were you, I would have focused on Stanton. I think that's the most annoying projection that I have. And Judge is a little bit higher, but Stanton's a lot bigger of an outlier. So I actually think that would have been more effective in terms of shooting holes in the projections.
Yes, he's a $1 player projected by ATC. He's a $13 player by OOPSY.
Yeah, so Stanton is clearly the bat speed, and it's like a 20 WRC swing because of the bat speed. That's the biggest swing on the biggest improver. And then there's like a decliners that are around 20 WR swing with and without bat speed. And I talked with Rob Silver on Twitter about this a little. I wish Stanton like came in a little lower, but I do think the bat speed helps. It clearly helps every projection system be more accurate compared to the alternative of not including it. But it is possible that it overprojected Stanton because he has been quite he has not been producing at that level, and I have him like on a rate stat basis with 4 or 5 extra home runs. But he is such an outlier for bat speed, so it's hard to...
So Stanton, you have projected for 36 homers. The last time he hit 30, and that's an average, the last time he hit 36 homers was back in 2018. He's now age 35 right now.
Yeah, but if I try to defend... I would like that projection to be... Like, I think that is too... Like, I probably... wouldn't pick mine, or I think I would have been happy if he came in with a few less homers. But assuming the same in plate appearances, it's 5 more homers than depth charts. So I think it's a bit aggressive for sure. I mean, he did have xWOBAs. He has been underperforming his xWOBA a little bit in the last couple of years, but that could be because he's just like super slow or something. So we'll see. But it was tough. It's tough to make a projection. Like, so in my testing, the BAT-X has been the best hitting projections, like rate stats in the last couple of years. And so the BAT-X is really good. And if you look at Acuna, who you mentioned, it's quite similar to me on the BAT-X because we both capture some of the important StatCast measures. But even with the BAT-X, it has biases, and it does like for the outliers. Like if you look at Luis Ariz and Stephen Kwan, the BAT-X is always like among the lowest systems on those guys. So right now the BAT-X has Kwan at a 99 WRC plus, and Luis Ariz at a 102 WRC plus, and that's like over 10 points lower than the next
Yeah,
system.
so let's talk about some players that some hitters that Oopsie hates. Jose Ramirez, Ketel Marte, Cody Bellinger, Freddie Freeman, Luis Arias, Edwards, and Hai Song Kim. Not Ha Song Kim, Hai Song Kim. So you mentioned a little bit about Arias, and Arias, and tell me if I'm wrong, but here, he's got a lower bat speed, and he just gets on with these little trickles. Maybe that is really giving you the big deficiency. Is that am I right in that he just gets dinged so much, even though he's just a menace with the batting average?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting into with mentioning
So like
Stanton
Jose
and the bad X.
Altuve, Jose Altuve was an example where this guy hits soft contact, but the dude gets on, and he was always projected worse than he really is. Is that maybe what's going on with Arias?
Yeah, I think with the outliers like Arias and Kwan, in terms of bat speed, it could be that it's under projecting them slightly. Although I don't think it's. I think I worked hard to make it not hit them as hard as the Bad X, because I know the Bad X. It's kind of the system I look up to, and the system I would like to catch. But at the same time, I know that it under projects, or at least in the past couple years, it's under projected Quan in our eyes, and other guys, potentially other guys like this. Or it could just be a small sample thing. I mean, it could be that Quan and our eyes just got lucky these
Yeah,
last
with
couple years.
Luis Arias, here's the interesting thing. Cardi has two models. He has the Bat and the Bat X. The Bat is more of a traditional only. The Bat X then incorporates Statcast, not fully incorporates, but gives a lot of weight to it. He's got 6 projected homers under the Bat. He's got only 1 projected homer under the Bat X for Luis Arias. So you can see in action how that takes place. By the way, you have a 6 homer projection. I think that's pretty reasonable, actually. A 6 homer projection for Arias,
Yeah,
he Oopsie doesn't. Oopsie is very different than ATC, but it's not a huge ding on his value as compared to ATC. I think the difference is ATC projects him for 81 runs and 56 RBIs. Oopsie has a much lower projection on the run, so maybe it's a team context or something. Something's going on, but it's more in the run production that I get the difference than in the actual homers or anything.
yeah, and I would go with ATC. I feel like ATC probably is a better bet to capture the runs and RBIs as of now. But yeah, we're really close on our eyes in terms of the rate stats. Like WRC, we're basically tied, and homers and steals were basically tied. So I actually feel really good about not hitting those guys too hard. And part of the reason that they didn't get hit that hard is because with bat speed, um, if you look at the past data, you can see there's not that much difference between having like 63 miles per hour, like Arias, and like 70 miles per hour, which league average is like 71. Those are all kind of lead to similar outcomes. It's only when you start getting at the higher end of the scale, so going from 71 to 72, 72 to 73 miles per hour, and so on, that you start getting gains from bat speed. So it's sort of nonlinear in that way, and that's why my projections weren't as pessimistic on Quan and Arias as they were.
Let's talk about pitchers that Oopsie likes as compared to others. Sean Burke, Andrew Painter, Luis Severino, Gavin Williams, Kumar Rocker. I don't know pitchers as well, so maybe you have some insight into why these guys really show up well with Oopsie.
Yeah, so Painter is tough because like guys that have he's been out for 2 years, and the only other pitcher that's been out for 2 years that may be relevant this year is like Lance McCullers. So it's hard. I would say his projection has a lot of volatility, and we want to see how he looked good in the AFL, but we want to see how he looks in the spring and in April. The other systems will either catch up fast, or my system will sour fast. Uh, Burke kind of reflects the different major league equivalencies. If you look at it compared to Steamer, my impression is that I don't know this for a fact, but my impression is that Steamer um, really puts a lot of weight on like AAA performance, but then in terms of AA and the levels below that, it discounts them very heavily. But my projections have been really good for rookie pitchers in particular the last couple of years. So I like the Burke projection as like a later DC type of candidate.
Okay. Yeah.
Gavin Williams, I think Park is playing a big role in that. So I use the Statcast Park factors, and they see Cleveland as more of a pitcher's park than the Fangraphs Park factors. So that could explain a bit of why I like all the Indians pitchers and or the Guardians pitchers. Sorry, dumb. I'm a dummy. And also the Mariners pitchers because Statcast park factors are really bullish on those parks in terms of run prevention. Rocker he was just really good as a prospect last year, but he could have some sort of like uh, innings limits.
Yeah. One thing I'll say though is that when you have an outsized projection that Oopsie or another projection likes, and it's pretty low, like we're not talking about like an active starter, but somebody that you would pick up in a draft champions, in pick 500 or whatever it is, I tend to actually like to choose those even more than what ATC shows, because I'm looking for upside from there, and any projection that can show, this is an upside. That's interesting to me. So just to put it in ATC volatility metrics, I'm looking for low volatility players most of the time in the active rounds. But in reserve rounds, I'm looking for high volatility. And when I'm looking at the high volatility players with the ATC vol is high, I then say, wow, you get a couple of really outlier projections. Maybe we can go with it, right? I wouldn't trust the Aaron Judge outlier projection because he's really up top, but I might trust a Kumar Rocker or an Andrew Painter really down below. There's something to this guy. Take a gamble, right, in the reserve round. So you have to know how to use projections and how to incorporate risk and take the high volatility guys late but not early. All right, let's end off with the pitchers that Oopsie hates. Roki Sasaki, although we mentioned because of it's just a translation that's not a real fair one. Eric Fetty, I guess KBO is getting in there. DJ Hers, Reynaldo Lopez, Ranger Suarez, and Shota Imanaga. I'm not sure how much weight you gave to this year's Shota Imanaga versus prior years in Japan, but maybe you could talk a little bit about why Oopsie hates some of those pitchers.
Yeah, so I think with Imanaga, Fetty, and Sasaki, it's all because the KBO and MPB performance wasn't weighted, so KBO would help Fetty a little bit, I think. Then Hertz is more. That's more interesting. I think that probably just comes down to like the major league equivalency, like different major league equivalencies, and potentially his stuff plus. I need to look at his stuff plus again now. But it looks like I'm less bullish on the K's and less bullish on his control than the other systems. So that would be more just like the major league equivalencies. And Ronaldo Lopez. He's tough to project because he was a reliever till last year, so he's still getting hit a bit by the role change. And he also was a guy that really outperformed his peripherals last year. And the same kind of goes for Suarez. Suarez also has been a guy that's stuff plus has been quite low on, so that doesn't help him either.
Yeah, I just bought Ranger Suarez in an NFBC auction last night. I bought him at $2. I don't think it can go wrong there, but yeah, I'm a lot higher on him than you are. Interestingly.
Yeah. But if you look at a lot of these guys, like if you look at FIP instead of the ERA, so basically ignoring the BABIP, then the differences are a bit smaller. So like,
oh yeah, sure.
I got 384 in Suarez. FIP versus Steamer 377, and it gets a bit smaller.
Yeah, that's true. All right, awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for enlightening us on the OOPSY projections. Really, congratulations on getting it on Fangraphs, and definitely looking forward to review it. Let's see how it does this year, and not just so much how it does, but what it does right. I always want to learn, and that's why I love this conversation, because I'm learning from you and learning on what what matters more. And hope everyone who's listening to this conversation really got some good stuff out of it. Before we go, why don't you just tell us where we can see some of your work and all things Jordan Rosenblum?
So my written content is at Fangraphs these days, and you can find like peak projections and other cuts of OOPSY at Scott the Statline, and I also publish projections at Prospects Live, and I'm active on the Patreon there or on Discord there, like talking with listeners and like giving trade advice. But yeah, it's been good discussing, and I'm hopeful that maybe one day I can carve out a small weight in ATC in certain components. Maybe a 5% weight, reasonable goals, but we'll see. I guess you don't do new systems, right? Because how would you?
Um, it's tougher to do new systems unless I know something very specific. Let's just put it very generally that way.
Okay,
Let's just
that
say
makes sense.
Dave Appleman has asked me to look at your stuff and regress it next year. So we will look at and if you want, I'll tell you what I think it does best and worst, and what the right way to incorporate your system is. So
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. I look forward to seeing how it evolves in the world.
yes. There you go. There you go. All right. I'm Ariel Cohen. You can see my stuff over at Fangraphs and over at Rotoballer for my written work. ATC Projections up on multiple sites. I'm on Twitter at ATCNY. Ruven will be back next time. We will continue our projections week. We will have Derek Carty on also to talk about some of the stuff going on with the bat. So surrounded by a lot of smart people this week, and we'll continue to do our positional analysis as well. All right, once again, thank you so much, Jordan Rosenblum, for coming on the show. From all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.